CNN ratings are continuing to tank as CEO Chris Licht attempts to remake the primetime and morning lineups, all in an effort to make the channel more centrist, according to the New York Post. A CNN insider said that even though Licht, quote, knows what he's doing, he has his work cut out for him.
Many changes have been implemented at CNN since Licht's arrival, including a laissez-faire approach to editorial, less partisanship, fewer blaring breaking news banners, and recently, the cancellation of Brian Stelter's show Reliable Sources.
So I certainly understand why a new person would come in and say this is a ship that needs to be righted, literally righted, perhaps by moving the ship a little to the right. I get that. You know, they were the CNN Plus total debacle.
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of Trump. They don't have Trump to beat up on anymore. Maybe they will again in the future. But right now, to the extent their business model was just to scare people about the Trump threat, it's not. It was only working, so much, and everyone's taken the ratings dip, post-COVID kind of departing the news. So I totally understand why they would want to take a new strategy. I think the question is whether they're even capable of winning back some people who feel alienated. It is the case that people used to think of CNN as the centrist news network, right? That was the straight news network.
Yes.
I can barely even remember. I'm too young.
But here's the problem. Straight news doesn't mean a kind of neutered, passionless, point of view-less, I think, way of talking about things. I think that there's a format, obviously, it's what we're doing here, where you have genuine ideological diversity. That's one way to do it. Just have panels that are comprised of the opinions that exist in the world, because what happens when you try to design a news network, a political party, a point of view around this fictional person that's right smack and dab in the middle of what a bunch of polls tell you, that person literally does not exist. The amalgamation of all of the views that are out there create a weird golem of a person that nobody is interested in and isn't real. I told an anecdote in a radar a couple of weeks ago about how early planes in the Air Force kept being crashed by pilots and they couldn't figure out why. And it's because they had designed the seats based on the average pilot. But nobody actually had the measurements of the average pilot, and they had realized they had to make things a little bit adjustable to make the plane stay in the air. It was all of this user error. So
that sounds apocryphal.
it is true, and it's basically what's going on here with CNN.
Yeah, and our own show is a good metaphor, because I would never describe us. We're certainly not centrist. You're not a centrist, and I'm not a centrist. We're balanced because we have enough different strong views, but they balance each other out because we have a range of people between you and me and the other hosts that come through these chairs, and I think that works. So we have an audience, but so just having blah kind of moderate centrist takes on everything is not really what people want. I mean, they want some of it is just news. They want the news covered. Right. Some of not everything. It requires an ideological perspective, or let alone a strong or extreme ideological perspective. But they want us to bring the perspectives we do have to the news whenever possible. So it's an interesting task to kind of change gears. It's probably not impossible. They can't do it, but they have to hire different people. These
people fully don't understand. It's clear to me what makes Tucker Carlson or Fox News more generally appealing. When you read what Democrats think about why Trump won or why people are watching Fox, they literally can't get beyond, well, people must just be more fascistic now. People must just be more racist now. People must be more bigoted now. And obviously they don't want to compete on who can be most bigoted, so they don't compete at all. They don't understand that there is a sincere investment in a populist movement where people are frustrated by all of the neoliberal politicians on both sides of the aisle that voted for policies, that sent jobs overseas, that voted for NAFTA, all of these kind of things. That was core to Trump's 2016 approach. That those kind of stories are core to what happens on Fox News. Now, I think that there is obviously an ideological bent and a kind of there's a reason why cherry-picked stories are presented in the way they are on Fox News, but there is a left version of that. I think the fundamental problem is that the left version of populism, a more sincere populism, is directly antithetical to what the advertiser base of those shows want. I think right populism still maintains the status quo in these important ways. They're not trying to reform our healthcare system. They're not trying to raise taxes on the rich. They're not trying to shut down the military-industrial complex, even though there are these marginal voices on the right who absolutely do.
No one's trying to shut down the military-industrial complex except a small number of left-wing people and a slightly larger but still quite small number of right-wing people.
Well, Sure.
In
Quantify that as
in
you will. So I think that is part of why you don't see a left Fox, because the ideas that the left broadly holds are all, not just the interventionism stuff, not the foreign policy stuff, but all of them are so threatening, frankly, to the advertiser base and the corporate status quo that they don't know how to do it. And they also don't, I think, value it or really understand what's happening in the media space.
I mean, MSNBC is more of it's not quite a left Fox, but I mean, the Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, for a while was much more, in the Trump years it became much more defiant, resistance-y, everything about Russia kind of fair. But I would say there was more left policy, probably not. Okay, I see you rolling your eyes at me, tell me why I'm wrong.
Even if, I would say Chris Hayes is probably the best, well, no, I'd say Mehdi Hassan is the best leftist on those shows, followed by Chris Hayes, and I wouldn't put Rachel Maddow anywhere near the left, to be honest. I've never really heard her advocate for any basic social Scandinavian style programs. She was antagonistic.
You don't think she supports basic Scandinavian social style
I've never
programs?
heard her say anything affirmatively in support.
I would presume she wants those things.
I've never heard her talk about the candidates that were presented, the 20-odd candidates that were running in the Democratic primary in 2019 in a way that made meaningful distinctions between what they were offering on that score to the American people. I've heard Chris Hayes dabble in that, and I've heard Mehdi, who is Canadian and knows how terrible we have it here firsthand compared to back home, talk about it at length. But the problem is, for those 2 to 3 people that we just named, I can name 3 literal Republicans that have primetime spots on MSNBC.
Yeah.
Literal Republicans.
The Trump, but what I was saying, the Trump years, I think, did move them in that direction.
Yeah, so that's another point. That your point about covering the news, I think, is right. People want straight news, but when your idea of what news needs to be covered is so focused on Russiagate as opposed to labor organizing.
And that was an editorial judgment, but Russiagate was an editorial judgment. That was something that they substantially, not entirely cooked up, but because there was underlying, reason to suspect what Russia was doing. But they decided this was the singular story of why Trump won. Hillary Clinton also decided that, and they humored her, and they made that all of the coverage was about how people didn't choose Trump. They were tricked by a broad conspiracy, the likes of which the U.S. has never seen, and that's why we got Trump elected, and we must cover it until he is imprisoned for his collusion and his crimes, which is never going to happen, though they primed audiences to expect it. And that was an editorial decision that this was the story. Just like that later, the editorial decision that January 6th was the story, the only story.
Yeah, because the alternative story is that it's partly their fault and their choice to cover Trump the way they did in lead up to the election. And by the way, they pushed out a lot of contributors at that time in the build up to 2016. People who did not want to do nonstop Trump coverage like Melissa Harris Perry were literally dethroned and replaced by Joy Ann Reid, who was a scab, basically, that filled in on her spot as a substitute black woman who was put in there to replace her and who was willing to talk about Trump 24/7 and got us, I would argue, the result that we had today.
All right. Well, tomorrow on Rising, we will hand off the baton to Ryan and Emily, I think for the last time, for their final edition, of Rising Fridays. Don't miss that.
And we'll, of course, be back in the chair same time next week. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Take care.
See you soon.